Hello everybody, it's Taylor Young with Durham's Partnership for Children. I hope you're all doing well whenever you are choosing to watch this video. Today's video is going to focus on some of the updates regarding policies and procedures and requirements for the 2020-2021 school year. Some of these, for the returning teachers, some of these I've had the opportunity to speak with you all about. Some of them may be new, so I wanted to go through everything that has changed and make sure you are aware of the updated policies and requirements, since you will be held accountable to this for this upcoming school year. So the objectives, after you watch this, you'll see here, you'll be able to identify the updates, identify the frequency of deadlines, and complete the required forms. You'll be able to determine how to remain in compliance with these guidelines, as well as understand the steps and the required forms if there is an instance of non-compliance, what will happen, what to do, what the consequences will be, so on and so forth. So the first updates that I'm going to talk about are regarding ongoing documentation and assessment. And what you see on the screen here, this top blurb right here, this is verbatim from the NC Pre-K program requirements and guidance document. So I say that and I include this just to make sure you all know that these additional requirements are not anything that are, like out of left field. They are aligned with what you should already be doing. So you'll see from the NC Pre-K program requirements and guidance that teachers are expected to conduct ongoing formative assessments and gather information about, the progress of each child, and use that information to plan and deliver instruction, as well as sharing that information with the child's family. So what all that means is the expectation is that you are continuing to collect documentation throughout the school year. And those formative assessments, ongoing assessments, are your checkpoints. So those are, of course, done quarterly. None of that information should be new. With the information and the guidance that is new is here on the bottom of the screen that you see on this teal colored text. So the updates are as follows. You should be, as a teacher, you should be collecting a minimum of 2 pieces of documentation per child per week each quarter. You should be collecting a minimum of 1 piece of documentation per objective for each child each quarter. I'm going to pause here. So what that means is there are 23 objectives from that you use to assess these children, that we assess our children on. So that means, let's say you're looking at objective 2 and it has dimensions to A, B, C, and D. To meet this requirement here, you don't need to have a piece of documentation for 2A and 2B and 2C and 2D, as long as you have 2A or 2B or 2C or 2D each quarter. The reason for this requirement here is because we want to make sure that in conversations with family and regarding the delivery of instruction, that you are collecting information and you're getting a holistic view of the child. It's not focused on just their literacy skills or just their math skills. We want to make sure we're focusing on all of the areas of development and learning. So inclusive of social, emotional, cognitive, physical, every area. This is to make sure that we capture all of that every quarter, every checkpoint period. Because how are you going to assess them every checkpoint period if you don't have the documentation for all these areas to back it up? The next bullet point, collect documentation pieces that have no more than 3 objectives or dimensions associated with it. This, again, is just to make sure that when collecting that information, it is as intentional as possible. In previous years, we have seen where there is 1 piece of documentation and there are almost 12, 12 objectives connected to it. At that point, really 1 piece of documentation, I'm not saying that it's impossible, but you kind of lose sight of what that piece of documentation is actually assessing and what you're looking at. So that's why we're limiting it to 3 per piece of documentation. And this is not new, but now we just have it more firm in writing that all documentation pieces should be entered into the TS Gold assessment system. So that's not to say that you cannot, you of course can still keep a paper copy of all these things. That's your prerogative if that's what your site chooses to do. However, you are required, if you have a paper system, you have to include all of what you have in your paper system in the TS Gold online assessment system. If you are a director or an administrator, you should be signing and submitting the quarterly checkpoint verification form each quarter by the date determined by the partnership. So what that means is and I'm going to go to the next page so you can see this form. So this is an example of what the quarterly checkpoint verification form will look like for the fall quarter. Teachers, you are required to submit your checkpoints by the date indicated on your teacher calendar, which you have already been provided. You're required to complete that by 4 p.m. This form is required to be submitted by administrators by 5 p.m. on that same date. So this form here is to ensure directors are signing off that teachers have submitted their quarterly checkpoints, that they are completed and finalized. And this is also just an effort to make sure that administrators are, they're in the communication loop. This provides some oversight and involves, you as directors to make sure that you are involved and that you do know what's happening as far as your teacher's documentation and that there are sufficient quality and quantity for each child. So the next policy update is regarding curriculum usage and weekly lesson planning. Again, this here in the lighter text is from the NC Pre-K program requirements and guidance document. So it's just discussing that the curriculum that has been approved that you are using in your classroom is the creative curriculum. That does not mean that you cannot supplement the curriculum with additional materials that you find outside of the curriculum kits and outside of the resources provided in TS Gold, but this is the foundation, this is the framework for the curriculum that you should be using, both online and virtually and in person. So the updates are as follows below in the teal text. It is a requirement that you are completing your lesson plans in the TS Gold online assessment system. There has been some confusion about this in the past, so I just want to make sure it's very clear. It is a requirement for all teachers that your lesson plans are submitted in TS Gold. This is especially important for our hybrid classrooms to make sure that your in-person instruction and your virtual instruction are aligned and that the pacing and the content is the same. You also should be submitting your lesson plans to your administrators via TS Gold. If you have not watched it yet, in the TS Gold module of the Summer Institute, there's one that is on the teach area, and I discuss how to submit that to your administrator. So if you haven't watched it already, that will give a little bit more information on how to complete this requirement. Again, this is added just to make sure that your directors are involved and that they are on the same page as you and that they are aware of what's happening in your classrooms. So the next topic and the policy update is regarding the inter-rater reliability certification. So for those teachers who are new, the inter-rater reliability, it's a certification process that's embedded within TS Gold, where you will evaluate sample profiles, and so you'll be given pieces of documentation for 3 fictitious children, and you will rate them as if they were your own children in your own classroom, similar to a checkpoint. And then your response is compared with those of teaching strategies what they consider to be master raters. Your answer has to be in agreement with their responses at least 80% of the time to be considered passing. So you see the reasons listed for this, why this is so important. So the updated language is below, again, in the teal. So it is a requirement of all lead teachers that you have the certification by the date indicated on your teacher calendar. The updated language is regarding the second bullet point here. So by mid-January, you should have at least 30% of the Innovator Reliability Certification attempted. So what that means is you will have either evaluated all of the 3 child profiles and 2 of the 6 areas of development, or you'll have evaluated 1 child in all 6. So just to give a little bit more explanation on that bullet point, there are 3 sample profiles of children, and there are 6 areas of development. So this whole certification, there are 18 areas in total. So 30%, you will have to have attempted at least 6 of the 18 areas. So however that looks for you is fine. We're not going to dictate how you approach completing this requirement. But just to give a little clarity, 30% means that you have attempted 6 of the total 18 different areas in the certification. And just a little note there that your certificate is valid for 3 years. If your certificate does expire within a school year, you will renew your certification by the same date indicated on the teacher calendar. So if you have a certification and it expires, let's say in November, but the due date on the calendar is not till April, that is okay. You will have until April, just like everybody else, to renew your certification. So now I'm going to talk about the compliance guidelines that have been updated. So this here is the compliance policy. So it just states that non-compliance with any of the requirements that are listed, the contract requirements, or any committee-approved procedures are going to have more identifiable consequences for both teachers and administrators. And you'll see here that says this is a working document. This is taken straight from the compliance guideline document, which you'll be able to access. I have included links in this presentation too. So you'll be able to see each form as a standalone form, as well as what the compliance document looks like as a whole. I do just want to point out that the last note here, if and when steps to compliance are not followed by teachers and administrators, the identified process will be used to determine if your non-compliance will jeopardize your eligibility for an NC pre-K contract. So what that means is if the non-compliance continues and is escalated through all of the steps, you may be in jeopardy of losing your NC pre-K contract. So that's why the next page here, I'm going to walk you through what these steps are and all of the support and an oversight embedded in each step to make sure that it does not get to that point. That is not the goal. The goal is to make sure that if there is an issue of non-compliance, that it is resolved quickly and efficiently. So here are the steps to compliance as listed on the document. Step 1, you are expected to just, to meet your requirements that are listed in the NC Pre-K document, as well as that are signed off on in the NC Pre-K contract with Durham's Partnership for Children. Step 2, so if there is an issue of noncompliance, if something happens where you have not met a requirement, you'll have a mandatory technical assistance meeting between the teacher and partnership staff. That will likely be myself. And administrators will be informed via either a face-to-face meeting or a follow-up email. If the non-compliance continues and it's escalated to step 3, this is where this is where the paper trail starts. So this is where you'll be filling out a written warning notice form. And I'll show you all of these forms once I talk through all 5 steps. So the written warning notice, it's the first, like I mentioned, first form in this process. This form indicates the individual plan for improvement towards compliance, the plan for administrative oversight. So your director and administrators will be involved in this conversation on how they can support you in meeting the requirements, and the timeline to come back into compliance. If for whatever reason you are not able to meet the requirements by the designated timeline on this form, it is escalated to step 4, which is where you'll be introduced to both the improvement plan and the monitoring form. So the improvement plan was developed as an escalation of noncompliance. So again, it outlines specific action steps, documentation required, who is responsible for these steps and documentation, and a target completion date. At this point, you also will be subject to periodic unannounced visits by partnership staff to observe these steps towards improvement. So this is to make sure that you are actually completing those steps that are outlined and agreed upon in this improvement plan. They'll be logged in the monitoring form. This is subject to change or to be modified to meet the needs of the hybrid delivery model that we are currently pursuing for this school year at the moment. So if hopefully we don't get to this point, but if so, we'll make sure that you are able to be fairly monitored for virtual and in-person instruction. The last step here, step 5, is where if you have filled out the improvement plan and you have been monitored and there are no, you have not completed any of the action steps, the target completion date has come and gone, and you have not yet met those requirements, this is where it will be escalated to the final step, which is the corrective action plan. So again, there are very similar, it's structured similarly to the improvement plan. There are action steps, documentation, outlines who is responsible, and a target completion date. The biggest difference here, as you'll see, is that if you are on step 5, you will be placed on probation as a teacher. So what this means is that as a teacher, you and your administrator will have weekly technical assistance visits with partnership staff until you have met the requirement and you are back in compliance. Once you are in compliance, you also will have mandatory bi-weekly technical assistance visits for 2 months following to make sure that the change is sustainable, that you have made a change that you can continue to upkeep, and that you remain in compliance with the guidelines and requirements. If you reach step 5 in the compliance process, like I mentioned earlier, how this process will be used to determine if your eligibility for an NC pre-K contract is jeopardized, this is the point at which that would be considered. There may be fiscal implications determined by partnership staff on a case-by-case basis. So next, I'm going to show you all these different forms, just so you have an idea of what they will look like. You also will be able to look at these at any point. I will include a link to a Google Drive where all of these will be available for you to see at any point. So this form here is the written warning notice form, which is step 3. So you see here there is space for the reason for the written warning, the plan for improvement, the plan for administrative oversight, and there's a space also to include the timeline. So you'll fill this out, I'll keep a copy, you'll keep a copy, and there will be additional TA support from myself prior to that deadline to make sure that you are back in compliance. If, for whatever reason, you are not able to meet those requirements by the agreed upon timeline, this will be escalated to step 4, which is where you see the improvement plan on the left here. So this is really the form that you will be working more closely with. You'll see, again, there are spaces for the improvement area, the actual plan and action steps, the target completion date, any documentation that needs to be submitted, and the person who is responsible. Like I mentioned, if you are escalated to step 4, this also includes the monitoring form. You won't have to fill this out or anything, but I wanted you to see what it looks like so that way you'll know what I will be looking for and what the form is that I'll be using. So see, it looks pretty similar to the improvement plan. That is intentional. That is to make sure that if I come for, or any other partnership staff comes for an unannounced visit, that we are able to easily identify, based on the improvement plan, what steps should be happening, what documentation there should be, and should be really easy to see if that's happening or if it's not. And step 5 is that final escalation. It's that corrective action plan. That is the final step, again, in that compliance process. Like I mentioned earlier, it's structured similarly to the improvement plan, but again, this does have a bit heavier of consequences as far as being placed on probation and the potential for fiscal implications. So I hope I provided enough clarity and explanation surrounding these updates that you know what the expectations are for this school year. All of the requirements and updates that were mentioned in this presentation, you will be held accountable for. So I just want to make sure that, again, that if you that you pay close attention to this, that you do use the Google Drive to access these forms to review whenever you may need. You are also being asked, I just want to make sure I point out, that you do click on the link to the virtual attendance form. This is the only manner in which your attendance will be documented for watching this webinar. This is also where you may submit any questions as well. So I will, again, make sure you will be sent that in an email. So please make sure that you take the time to fill that out. Please do so no later than September 4th, since this is the final day of the Summer Institute. And again, please use that form if you have any questions. If you have any additional questions that you feel like need more attention than in the form, please feel free to give me a call or email me, and I am happy to help out. Thank you for watching.